Corinne Gustavson was born on January the 2nd, 1986. She lived in the city of Edmonton in Alberta, Canada, along with her mum, Karen Villette, and dad, Ray Gustavson, and two older siblings, Roseanne and Barry. Corinne was nicknamed Punky because of her spiky hair like a rooster tail, which wouldn't go down. On the morning of September the 6th, 1992, Karen took out her oldest child, while the two other children stayed at home with their dad. Corinne, who was 6 years old, wanted to go out and play in the front yard with her friend Lindsay. Ray could see the girls playing from where he was sat, and in a matter of moments things would change. Ray got up to go and fetch something, and when he came back he couldn't see the girls in the front yard at all. Meanwhile, Lindsay had ran into her mum's house in a panic, saying that a murderer had taken Corinne. Ray had come out of the house just as Lindsay's mum rushed towards him, telling him what Lindsay had said. Police were called, and so by the time Karen had come back, police were already there. Lindsay had told the police that the man had grabbed Corinne. She called him the boogeyman. 5-year-old Lindsay gave a description of the man in the best way a child could. He was described to be 5'5" to 6 foot tall, slim build, dark skin with an earring, and dark hair with a white patch in the middle of his head. All this time the police are searching, going door to door, house to house, and asking if anyone had any information. And a 9-year-old boy who had been playing in the area saw all the police and the commotion, and when the police arrived at his door, the boy had mentioned that earlier he saw a man carrying a little girl with blonde hair in a bear hug and carried her to a blue van. After providing another description, police provided one for the public. And meanwhile, everybody in the area searched for the missing 6-year-old. All the while, media would turn up outside the home of the Corinne's devastated family. And it was 2 days later before there was any news. On the 8th of September, a man at a local trucking yard, just on the edge of Edmonton, was doing some vehicle checks when he suddenly noticed what appeared to be a doll laying between two trailers. On closer inspection, and to his horror, he realised it was a little girl lying face down. Ray had to identify the body, and it was confirmed it was Corinne. Searching for clues on a cold, drizzly night, police and forensics worked by flashlight. They found tyre marks and a strange-looking drag mark. An autopsy was performed, and it was found that someone had attempted to redress Corinne, but her pants were on backwards, and unfortunately, we all know what that means. And also her coat was put on, but her arms were not in the sleeves. Poor Corinne had been badly violated and smothered to death. But also on the clothing, forensics also found her hair. The public was absolutely outraged, and any description of the blue van described by the 9-year-old witness came under suspicion and would be phoned in to the police with license plates given in the hope of finding the owner and possible connection to Corinne's murder. The list of suspects grew, and the public and police feared that this could happen again. Yet, with all the tips, nothing led to an arrest. Going back to the tyre marks and the strange drag marks, casts were made when the ground had dried up. The mysterious markings were identified as someone wearing cleated sports shoes. By lifting the heel with the toe of the shoe dragged back about 18 plus inches to cover the shoe prints. From measurements, they were also made by size 6 shoes. The tyre prints were likely from a front-wheel drive American car. Police had then thought that Corinne had been abducted by a blue van, but her body had been dumped with the murderer using a car. Investigators looked into every available avenue. This included people who were in a mental hospital, parolees, or even people that had committed suicide since Corinne's death. The public made petitions to bring back the death penalty, and also creating groups to find clues and any leads that came through in order to help police. Although there was no DNA evidence, police asked all potential suspects to give hair, saliva and blood samples. This was so that every suspect unwilling to give a sample would be flagged up. Secondly, with the advancing DNA technology, the hair found on Corinne would eventually come in useful. Along with other potential suspects, a 30-year-old man called Clifford Slay stood out as he had a long criminal record. After he was questioned for the rape of a 13-year-old girl, he was also questioned for the Gustavson murder. He also matched the description of the killer. The police got a warrant to search his home, and during the search, the police found the same kind of shoes, which were baseball cleats. He actually complied when he was asked for the blood, saliva and hair samples. But because he complied to have the samples taken, it gave the police the impression that he had nothing to do with the crime, and he might not be their guy after all. And also the cleats that were found in Clifford's home were compared to the shoe casting, which didn't match. Clifford also had an alibi, and his family vouched for him. A convict who was in custody for killing a store clerk got the police attention after they found out that he wore special cleated shoes, as he was a roofer. When the police spoke to him, he established the fact that he did not kill the little girl, and he also had an alibi. The police let him go. A year later, there was still no solid leads, but nobody was willing to give up hope. Police were still determined to catch the killer. In the year 2000, with DNA technology which improved massively, new DNA testing methods meant the police were able to submit Corinne's clothing to North American DNA Lab. Finally, in March 2001, trace amounts of semen were found on a section of Corinne's clothing. This then provided the detectives with a unique DNA profile. This could now be compared to the hundreds of blood, saliva and hair samples taken over the last decade. They started with the top 10 suspects, which include a man called Skunk, who I mentioned earlier, and also Ron Davies, Corinne's uncle. These people were cleared, except for one man called Clifford Slay. His sample had been used for evidence in another trial, which was the 13-year-old rape victim. So they had to try and get a fresh sample. This wasn't a problem though, as a new law came in and every violent offender had to provide DNA samples. And Clifford Slay was already a convicted rapist, so his sample was already on the national database. When police compared it with their profile, it turned out to be a match. To make sure, they wanted to secure a new DNA for their own evidence. Clifford Slay, who was currently in prison for 12 years, gave a fresh DNA sample, and at this point, this is when he was again questioned about Corinne's murder. Suddenly, he changed his tune, and he immediately started trying to come across as a victim, talking about his childhood, which led him to start talking about the murder of Corinne. It wasn't long before he told his version, which was that he had spent the day in Edmonton drinking with his common-law wife and her family when she started telling people how he was beating her up. He argues with her about this, and the next morning he was so angry he decided to pay her back and punish his wife by looking for her 12-year-old daughter in order to harm her sexually. He asks to take a relative's car, which was an American front-wheel drive, and started looking for the 12-year-old stepdaughter. But when he couldn't find her, he parked up in a parking lot where Corinne lived. And that's when he saw 6-year-old Corinne by the fence. This is when he decided to take his anger out on her instead. And he snatched Corinne and violated her. And he said he left her in the trucking yard still alive, although the autopsy results would show that she was smothered to death. Police were therefore able to proceed with a first-degree murder charge. March 14th, 2003, Clifford was finally charged with Corinne's murder. Everybody could breathe a sigh of relief as this evil killer was finally caught. In May 2005, Clifford Slay stood trial. Although he tried to get away with the first-degree murder, he admitted to kidnapping and manslaughter, which was rejected. But after a 2-week trial, they found Clifford guilty to first-degree murder, aggravated sexual assault and kidnapping, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Thank you for watching Dark Crime Time. Don't forget to like and subscribe.